Yes, I see.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. Okay, awesome. So we'll go ahead and kick it off. Um, so thanks for everyone joining. If this is your first time, these are the AKS office hours, Azure Kubernetes service. My name is Kendall Roden, and I have Dave with me as well. And I need to update this slide because I recently switched roles. So if you weren't aware, a couple of weeks ago, I became the program manager for Azure Container Apps. So super excited to make sure that we drive some conversation around that as well and talk about how, any questions that you might have in that space, feel free to send them my way. So that's a little bit about me. Dave's on the call as well. We won't go through too much about us, but if you want to reach out, definitely reach out on Twitter or, via email. We love any comments or suggestions. And we'll make sure that we get that recording up from last time. So thanks for that suggestion, Richard. So if you're new here, our goal is essentially to provide a space where users of Kubernetes, specifically Azure Kubernetes Service, can come together and talk about updates to the platform. Obviously, we're rolling out a ton of new features every couple of weeks. And so trying to maintain a level of understanding of what's going on and what's new and what features are available is always great. And so we wanted to provide that place. And so hopefully for those of you who've been joining all year, you've seen some benefit from having these touch points. And hopefully moving forward, we'll continue to provide good content and find ways that we can make this relevant moving into the new year. So I have a couple of quick AKS updates to cover, and then we can go presenters. And if there's no questions, I'd appreciate everyone staying on mute. If you do have a question, feel free to interrupt me. But if not, just make sure that you're on mute if possible. So in terms of AKS updates, just wanted to go over our most recent release notes. So this is from, I guess it would be, like 7 days ago or so now. And so one of, the big thing here is that moving forward with Kubernetes 123, Containerd will be the default container runtime for Windows nodes in addition to Linux node pools. So this has already been the case on the Linux side, but just wanted to kind of call that out. So if you are running Windows containers and haven't tested out the Containerd runtime for that, there is a way that you can do that manually, and it's just something to be aware of and to keep an eye out for down the line. Another one is, I know that there's been kind of a lot around connectivity and rollbacks and rollouts, and so I apologize for maybe some of the confusion in this space, but there won't be any additional connectivity rollout for the rest of the year, and we'll continue that rollout in 2022. I think we've touched on this, I think, several times over the past couple of calls, that there's the ability for Kubernetes to basically do an auto cert rotation for some of the certs that are required on the Kubernetes control plane side. And so we've already done some rollout over the past few months, and that will continue to happen. So just keep that in mind. And if you want to make use of some of these features, then you can run basically a cluster upgrade. And then last but not least, big thing here is Kubernetes 119 will be removed on January 31st. So just gear up for that new year kind of deprecation and lack of availability. Obviously, with 122 being supported, 119 will be phased out. And this is already an extended support cycle here. And I guess something good to call out is in Kubernetes 123, we're basically following the upstream deprecation of some of these in-tree capabilities and features with the move to out of tree. And so one of those is going to be the current way that you authenticate when it comes to pulling your kubeconfig down. And this is going to be released with a new exec protocol, I guess. And so basically what this will mean is that kube login will basically be automatically installed for you or downloaded when you're using AKS with the Azure CLI. Or any other Azure clients. However, if you're not using the Azure CLI, you need to make sure that you basically install kube login, because this will be the new pathway for basically authenticating to your API server. So there's documentation on what kube login is, and it's something that some of you might be familiar with if you were already using it to do managed identity or service principal non-interactive login to your API server. So it's not necessarily new, but it is a change in how we're going to be pulling that kubeconfig down and authenticating to the API server. And then the only other things that were worth noting here, if you didn't take a look at these release notes already, is there were a couple of bug fixes that went in. I know that we have a feature for support for HTTP proxy settings, and I think there was basically a bug that was ignoring some of these settings, so that that's been fixed. And then you also couldn't create a node pool that had 0 nodes. That should be fixed as well. And then I think if you were using Windows node pools and had like small VM sizes within those node pools, the CSI driver basically was crashing due to a probe timeout. So that's been increased. So if any of those are relevant, that's worth calling out. All right, so from a feature perspective, GA features, Kubernetes 122 is now available. So obviously with the upstream 123 release, we usually see a cadence of supporting the previous release on AKS. So that's what's happening, right? 122 is now supported in AKS, and 123 is now available publicly from an open source perspective. And then we've also released some new patch versions for 120, 121, 122. And then in preview, we have a couple of exciting updates. One of them I know many of you have been waiting on, but that's going to be the AKS GitOps extension is now available in preview. So if you're already making use of Flux v2, this is basically kind of a management configuration for applications in AKS. And if you're using Azure Arc, we already had the GitOps extension for Azure Arc. So bringing that into the AKS fold without using the Azure Arc capability. And so hopefully if you're, want to manage GitOps experience for AKS, this will, meet that need. So I haven't personally played around with it yet, but I'd be curious to see what y'all's experience has been so far. If you have, feel free to drop that in the chat window, but definitely explore this if you haven't already. And then Microsoft Defender for containers in preview. So this is a new offering that basically merges the capabilities from Azure Defender for Kubernetes and then Azure Defender for container registries. I won't get into this too much because we have Maya on the call today, and this is going to be the majority of what she'll be talking about with us, but definitely a lot of really good, I think, progress in this space, as noted on previous calls, that they were working on some great stuff. So keep that in mind. And I do think that we're going to try to kick off the new year with an AKS roadmap call. So I think that would just be great to level set and have everyone on the same page in the new year with an understanding of what our priorities are, what features are in flight, and kind of jog our brains after coming back from potential time off during the holidays. So I mentioned 122 availability in AKS. We now have some exciting news in the open source space, the Kubernetes 123 release. So I do have the links for the the Kubernetes upstream release notes. So I'll drop those in the chat here. There are 47 enhancements, 11 that went stable or GA, 17 beta, 19 alpha, and 1 deprecation. And I just went through and kind of called out a few that I thought were interesting or worth highlighting. So one of them is going to be the deprecation of flex volume as a driver here. The big thing here is if you think about some of our Azure implementations like blob views, so being able to use the flex volume driver in order to connect to Azure blob storage, or using flex volume driver for SMB shares. These are no longer going to be actively maintained, or actually, I guess I should say they're no longer actively being contributed to. However, I think they're in maintenance mode. But just keep in mind that these will be deprecated, with AKS 123. So definitely make sure that you're using the CSI driver implementation to access things like Azure Blob Storage or SMB. And then from a stable perspective, so IPv4 v6 dual stack support went GA in upstream Kubernetes. So I know this is definitely something a lot of people have been waiting on. So keep in mind that as of 123, this will be available. And it's already really been available, I guess, in a couple of the more recent versions of upstream Kubernetes. But now that is going to be available kind of for you to make use of. It's not necessarily going to mean that you can't use single stack, right? That's still going to be the default for things like pods and services. However, if you're using kind of a CNI implementation that supports dual stack, and you've, I think, used some annotations and made the necessary changes, you can take advantage of this capability. Horizontal pod autoscaler v2 went GA along with generic ephemeral volumes. So if you want to read more about kind of what these capabilities are, then definitely make sure that you take a look at these release notes. And then if you're new to the call or newer to Kubernetes, we've talked about pod security policy deprecation. Like, that's been in progress for a really long time. Went beta this release for 123, the replacement for that, which is called pod security. It's basically an admission controller that enforces security standards on pods within a namespace based on some labels set at the enforcement level. So as of 123, the pod security feature gate will be enabled by default to make use of this capability. And then another thing worth calling out, so there's a feature called CSI migration, which basically will take in-tree storage plugins on various cloud providers and basically seamlessly translate those into a CSI driver implementation. However, and so you shouldn't really see a difference on the back end from an upstream perspective. However, for Azure Disk upstream, this is still in beta. So even though it's gone GA for a few of the in-tree storage plugins, it's still in beta for Azure Disk. I thought this alpha feature was cool. So basically, when you create a custom resource definition, you also have the ability to create some expression validations, essentially. And this will basically work on schemas that are structural, where you can actually go in and do some validation on your own custom resource definition objects within Kubernetes. So if you don't meet a certain standard, or if it doesn't meet the kind of admission guidance, then you won't be able to create the CRD. Okay, awesome. So I think this is worth calling out. And once again, there's more here for you to dive into on your own time. Just a couple things from an ecosystem perspective. Obviously, with it being the end of the year, there's a lot of sort of end of year looking back type of articles and looking forward. So these are a couple that I put together. So one of them is just a quick ebook from Nginx that I thought would be interesting. It's kind of all around taking your cluster from test to production and talking through some of the resiliency, visibility challenges, security considerations. I know everyone loves a good ebook. So this one's out of Nginx. So if you're interested in kind of seeing what they put together, I'll drop the link to that in the chat. And then the rest of these are CNCF based. So one is sort of a benchmarking. They did some studies across how large enterprises were setting up their Kubernetes clusters. So it has a lot of percentages and ways that you can kind of compare your own Kubernetes setup to some of the other, peers in the industry. And then another one is sort of the end of year update from the CNCF, talking about a lot of the open source projects. So some of the themes that came out of this, OpenTelemetry is basically the second largest contributor in the Cloud Native Compute Foundation, which I thought was interesting. The GitOps ecosystem had some of the largest, most high velocity projects from the CNCF between Argo and Flux. So obviously our support of that in AKS, I think, is a really good step in the right direction. And then there's been a huge shift towards developer productivity. And so that's kind of coming through things like the Backstage project and a big Backstage project, and also Dapper being a huge project that contributed to this movement. And then Envoy basically just has a really strong growing community and is one of the most widely used projects across service mesh ecosystem. So I thought these were all pretty much in line with what we would anticipate, but they did some really cool graphics that you can look at to see some of the velocity across these projects. And then I summarized this article here pretty quickly, but I thought this was a pretty good one. So open source tools worth taking a look at. This was just a member blog post. And some of these we're probably really familiar with, things like Argo for GitOps and Prometheus for metrics, Trivy for open source container scanning. But there's some other ones in there that I'm not even really familiar with, like Devtron and Kubescape. So if you're interested, I'll drop that link in the chat as well. So this is what I had today. I'd love anybody that has additional updates they want to drop to put them in the chat window. That'd be great. But without further ado, if there are no questions in the chat, then I'll pass it over to today's presenter, Maya, and I think she might have a couple from her team that joined. So Maya, I'll let you take it away.
Hi, everybody. Do you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Great. So I'm super excited to be here with you today and to share the news of Microsoft Defender for Cloud releasing a new plan for container security. Let me share my screen. Do you see the slide deck?
Yes.
Great. First of all, I want to introduce myself. My name is Maya Herskovic. I'm part of the Microsoft Defender for Cloud product management team. My main focus is on container security. I've been with Microsoft for the last 2.5 years, where I was responsible for the offering of Defender for Kubernetes and Defender for Container Registry, which now merged. And I joined here today to share some more details about the new offering and how it joins and improves the existing one that we have for with Microsoft Defender. Microsoft Defender is a rebranded name for Azure Security Center. For those of you who were familiar, in last Ignite, we changed the name for Microsoft Defender as part of the motion of going into multi-cloud. Um, the context today is about container security, and to give like a few sentences about why we needed dedicated or you needed dedicated security tools, or so traditional security tools doesn't really fit in the Kubernetes world. So, as you know, unlike traditional workload, we see that containers are elastic and they resize rapidly. So that's one thing. The other thing is about images, which are immutable and short-lived, and that really brings a lot of focus into shift left capabilities and trying to fix vulnerabilities and configuration drift early in the pipeline. Also, from a visibility perspective, traditional tools doesn't give the right visibility. Of course, with the new platform comes new configuration drift. So basically, we need dedicated security tools for container security. And that's not new, just kind of a background of why container security is a topic of its own. I wanted to give you a few words about what is Microsoft Defender for Cloud, for those of you who are not familiar with it. It's an offering of Azure, which recently came out of Azure and now is a multi-cloud offering for security. It is mainly divided into two main pillars. The first one is cloud workload protection. um, this is the right side of the screen, where there's advanced runtime protection capabilities for different types of workload, from servers through cloud native compute such as containers up until IoT. And we also have CSPM, which is Cloud Security Posture Management, which is more about the configuration of the environment, health of the environment. In this part of the product, we monitor for specific baselines and policies, compliance. We provide automation tools for fixing, and of course, we have a KPI, which is the secure score, to measure the health of your environment. So this is more of a preventive measurement and making sure the hygiene of the environment is good, while the CWP part more focuses on the runtime protection capabilities. So those are the two main pillars, which usually the Microsoft Defender for Cloud is divided to. And when we talk about container security, usually it is under the category of cloud workload protection, but having it under the Microsoft Defender for Cloud, I wanted to mention that we touch on both pieces, so both hardening and runtime protection, and it's part of a larger platform that doesn't deal only with Kubernetes, also with different workloads inside Azure and also now outside of Azure. Okay, but I didn't come today to talk about the entire Microsoft Defender for cloud. I did come today to share with you the exciting news of the new offering of Microsoft Defender for containers. It's a new plan. And it basically merges two existing plans. For those of you who were familiar with the Kubernetes and container registries plan, which Kubernetes plan provided threat detection on the cluster level, and container registry provided image scanning and vulnerability assessment for registry for ACR registry, images that are based on ACR. And now with and talking with a lot of customers throughout the year and a half, 2 years that the offering was GA'd, we found out that the way that we collected information and the deployment was not convenient and was not cloud native. So with that, we decided to develop a daemon set to collect information. This daemon set now is deployed and integrate as part of AKS as a security profile. So now you can see it really part of your cluster. And I'm gonna demonstrate that. Uh, and with this daemon set, it is also multi-cloud. So today we are in AKS office hours, but if you have also multi-cloud workload running, so you should know that you can use this Defender also to monitor your Amazon EKS, your Kubernetes on-prem and on IaaS on other clouds, and kind of have one pane of glass to see all recommendations, threat detection alerts, vulnerabilities all on one dashboard. So the new offering, it provides the new agent, the new multi-cloud, and now we also finally combine the image scanning, the vulnerability assessment that we do on the registry with the runtime visibility that we have. So we are now alerting or notifying you on vulnerabilities, on images with vulnerabilities that are currently running on your environment. And we've added a lot more of node level or host level threat detection with behavioral analytics. We also have deterministic threat detection alerts where we monitor processes of the node and provide application level threat detection. This new plan also comes with a new business model. So up until recently, people needed to or the plan was built. The Kubernetes plan was built by billable units of VM cores, vCores, and the container registry was built per image, per scanned image. So now we're uniting those plans and we're billing only per vCore, where image scanning is included up until a specific cap. So you have like a limited number of images that you can scan, but based on analysis that we've done, it should 95% of customers should not see any image scan charges and can scan as same as you were scanning today. And if you want to scan more, that would cost same as it was in the old plan. And this new release was announced last week, and we already started seeing many customers adopting it, and it's basically a super exciting for us. And I want to share a little bit more details about that. Um, Yeah, so first I want to talk about the components that we have, the component that we have here, the new Defender profile. You see it here with the green pods, the daemon set that exists on each node. We also leverage the integration with Gatekeeper and Azure Policy, which you are probably familiar with if you're been visiting this office hours frequently. And so the Defender profile is basically a daemon set. It is deployed on each of the worker nodes in your AKS clusters. It collects security signals and events, and it is using eBPF technologies based on sysdig open source. Um, with this Defender profile, we provide also at scale a frictionless onboarding, which means that from Defender side, you can configure that you want this Defender to be enabled on all your AKS clusters from now on, existing and future, and we will make sure to have that deployed with no action on your side, and even if it gets deleted, then we would redeploy the Defender agent. This is good for security admins that want to ensure the Defender is running and reporting threat detection alerts and doesn't want the option to remove that agent. You don't have to use the auto provisioning or the at scale capability, and you can also deploy the AKS profile on a cluster level. And there are many options to do that. You can do it via Defender for Cloud. We have a recommendation, we call it in Defender for Cloud, and I will demonstrate it with a quick fix. So one click remediation button where you can just say that you want the Defender profile and it gets installed. You can you can also install it via REST API and ARM template. And the CLI option is still under development, but will be added soon and before GA time. So the different options of how to deploy and whether to use the auto provision is of course documented, and I can also demonstrate it. Wanted to show you that now the profile is really part of uh, integrated as part of AKS. So you can see here that I have the managed clusters, and underneath now we have a new kind of property which is called security profile, and one of the one and currently it's the only one I believe under the security profile, you see the Azure Defender. In this case, it's enabled, and we need to provide a log analytics workspace ID. Even though data is not being saved into the workspace, we use it as a data pipeline. So that's about the profile. And I wanted to refresh what the value that is provided by installing the Defender add-on and enabling the plan on the Defender side. So you would get a vulnerability assessment, which means that you get image scanning without any configuration or deployment that you need to do on your side, where images are scanned on push to the registry and are being continuously scanned based on activity on the registry, but also based on runtime indication, and you will be alerted on images that are running and are vulnerable, so as images that are vulnerable and sit on the ACR. In addition, we provide hardening recommendation and cluster hygiene. Those are security recommendation to improve your posture, kind of baseline set of control plane recommendation on your AKS cluster level. And also we have the Docker CIS. We are working also to add the Kubernetes CIS as well. In addition, we have runtime protection where we provide a threat detection capabilities using an agentless approach for collecting audit log from AKS clusters. So we sit in Azure, we have access to Kubernetes audit logs, and we analyze them. No configuration is done, and it's completely agentless from your end. And there's the agent Gate part, which collects node level signals such as processes for additional threat detection coverage. And the fourth part is about policies and enforcement, where we use the Azure policy and Gatekeeper integration into AKS. We also integrated it into Defender and kind of taking a set of security built-in policies and reflecting those as part of your hygiene status and recommendation, and just integrating them into the overall security posture view that you have for your clusters. And you can also configure it not directly via policy, but directly via Defender if you'd like. Um, Regarding admission control policies with Gatekeeper, um, I'm assuming that you are familiar with that, but if not, Gatekeeper is an open source. It's an admission controller over Kubernetes. With Gatekeeper, every request to the Kubernetes API server is being monitored, and before it is being persisted to the cluster, with an option not only to audit but also to enforce. So we provide an enhanced UI over the policy, where you can see you're violating components, or for example, if you choose to monitor for container images should be deployed from trusted registries, you can see which pods are actually violating this, and you can even choose to deny, which means that from now on images from untrusted registries will not be permitted into the cluster. And that's basically the capability with Gatekeeper. Regarding container image scanning, I think I reviewed that, but the scanning is done from ACR, which and the scanner itself is a Qualys-based scanner. So Qualys is a gray label partnership that we have, where they do the scanning, but it's locally in Azure. There's no kind of deployment or configuration required from customer end. Images are scanned or the trigger of scanning is both for push and continuously, and we scan based on runtime indication as well. And for CI/CD scanning, that's something that we also have a preview for, and we're expanding. Defender is expanding into the CI/CD area and is looking to provide additional capabilities in the CI/CD. So stay tuned for that. Kind of thing that you need to or the way that I like to think about vulnerability assessment and where it should be kind of monitored throughout the pipeline. So this is one of the most important security controls that you have to have, but not everybody is aware that vulnerability assessment should be done across the pipeline, and it's not enough to do vulnerability assessment. So it is recommended to do it as left as possible in the build, in the CI/CD phase of the pipeline, but it's not enough, because as we've seen this week, last week, we have 0 days vulnerability, so it's not enough to scan one time. During runtime, we can images can still be vulnerable, so we need to be able to scan along the pipeline in each phase. And we also need to have kind of gating controls between the different stages of the pipeline. So failing the build when we find vulnerabilities, and failing deployments for vulnerable images. This is, by the way, capabilities that we plan to release to private in early January. So just wanted to share with you that this is the way that we in Defender for Cloud think about vulnerabilities, or how to reach zero vulnerabilities in running deployments. This is kind of the goal, or the North Star that we aimed to. Um, Regarding runtime threat detection, we follow very closely the MITRE attack metrics. Uh, Actually, the Microsoft Defender for Cloud was doing the MITRE for Kubernetes together with MITRE. So developing it together, and this is the kind of the full metrics that we follow. And each new attack that we find, whether it's in the wild or on our labs, we always measure it against existing tactics and techniques. And if we see that there's specific techniques that are missing, we are also adding it to the metrics, and each threat detection alert or runtime detection that we provide, we also make sure to note which tactic it belongs to in the MITRE, just to to better follow attacks. So, for example, if you look at a specific kubeflow attack, which was famous, I think, a year ago, we did kind of have several alerts across the attack, but when you go back into the MITRE and look at it, you can see really clearly that attack maps back into the MITRE from initial access to execution. We even saw their credential access up until impact, where the actual thing was there. In that case, were resource hijacking of crypto miner attack. One kind of last thing I wanted to share with you before moving to a demo and few Q&A, is that I kind of hinted it along the slide, but one of the major things that we did with Microsoft Defender was moving outside of Azure and expanding into multi-cloud. So now we're also, from Kubernetes perspective, we announced public preview of support of our of Amazon EKS and Kubernetes on-prem. We're leveraging Azure Arc in order to do that. And the goal is to provide this single pane of glass with the same kind of component daemon set, which is running across the environment. And currently we provide only the threat detection for multi-cloud, but that's something, the priority to all AKS capabilities is something we are very invested in. And as mentioned, you can also see the non-AKS cluster via Azure Arc, if not via the Defender portal or API. That's kind of from content that I wanted to share with you today, and I thought of doing a short demo. Let me just. I actually don't have many people from my team here answering the chat, so maybe if there are a lot of questions there, um, maybe we'll take a few minutes near the end and we'll review them. So I'm sorry if you're asking and not getting any response. So this is so let's start from the beginning. If you go into Azure and want to search for Defender for Cloud, so you get into the Microsoft Defender for Cloud dashboard. Within this dashboard, you can see For example, the inventory of your resources, looking at specific resource types. We can search for, so as you see, we monitor now all your resources across environments, so many resources type. But if we are interested only on Kubernetes, we can search for EKS, AKS, and ARC, and you can see the different resources and inventory that you have here. One thing to note is that I see here an upgrade available. So that means that this specific subscription is onboarded to the old Kubernetes plan. And that's why it is indicated as upgrade available. And while those clusters are onboarded into the new plan. If we choose, for example, one cluster, we can dive into specifics of this cluster, and we can see that it has a set of recommendations and a set of alerts. This you can see here the status, whether it's healthy or unhealthy, and you can even see the number of violating components that you have. For example, one of the basic one is privileged containers should be avoided, and then I can see exactly which privileged containers are running on this cluster, and I have some remediation options, and I can see here the specific component ID um, that is a privilege in that case. And as previously I showed you, you can also uh, deny this policy, meaning from that point on, all privileged containers would be requests um, would be cancelled or would be result in an error. And you can choose here the scope of where you want to apply such a policy. Um, in addition to that, you can view alerts on this specific resource, and you can see here a full list of alerts that we have, and dive into a specific alert, kind of see the entire context of the alert, which container triggered this alert, what was the file, the host that the container is sitting on, or and the process that generated this alert. So that's kind of from inventory kind of perspective, how you can use Defender for Cloud. There are additional options where you can, if you want to view your posture management, so you would go into recommendations and kind of look into the different recommendations, and check out which posture recommendation we have for you. One of the things I wanted you to note is that we have the Defender profile, which I've mentioned. We have a way to install that with a quick fix, like a one-click button. As I mentioned, you can do it in one cluster or more. You see here, fix 2 resources. Um, Another option to do that is via the settings of your environment. Uh, and you can do that if you go to the subscription and the auto provisioning. We have a whole section for Kubernetes cluster, and we have different types of configuration, and policy add-on can be configured to be deployed at scale, so as the new security profile. If we're here in the screen, this is the way to enable the new plan, and auto provisioning is configured by default. So that's also something new that we just now introduced. I think we have like about 10 minutes, and I wanted to pause and give you some times for Q&A. This is covers what I wanted to share with you, and any type of feedback would be more than welcome.
So we've had a lot of activity in the chat window. So if anyone has any questions that haven't been touched on, I'd ask that you come off mute just so that we don't have to scroll up and kind of search through all of them, because it seems like some have been answered by Michael and some of the team. So feel free to drop those questions in the chat now, or just come off mute and ask would be probably the easiest. So we just got a question: will the output or configuration of these new capabilities be queryable through the resource graph?
Yeah, for sure. Any alerts or recommendation in Microsoft Defender.
Si j'avoue.
So any type of recommendation or alert in Azure Security Center is available in Azure Resource Graph under the assessments or alerts types, and even there's a short kind of shortcut via the portal to get the right queries. So you can choose, like, for example, um, a specific a specific recommendation, and within that recommendation you can open the query on the security findings or affected resources. Here in this specific case, we have like also API for finding, and this will open the query in ARG. So even in the UI, you have shortcuts in order to find the appropriate ARG query. But everything in Microsoft Defender for Cloud is in ARG, yes.
Quick question from me, if possible. The runtime scanning of the container images, is that only based on ones that are in our container registry, or if I pull a container image from someone else's registry, will we get runtime scanning on that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So thank you for that. So currently we support only ACR, but we definitely, as part of the motion to go into multi-cloud, we definitely are looking currently at options of how to scan other images from other registries. Just because now we scan using a quality scanner and we do a dynamic scan where we actually run the image, it's more challenging for us to do it from other registries, and that's something that we're looking into and will hopefully deliver in the first half of next year. So I hope really soon, but today, to answer your question, it's only ACR-based images that we can show vulnerabilities based on. But runtime threat detection is of course based on the runtime workload, and it's regardless to the images resource.
All right, let's see. I'm looking if there's any other questions. Oh, I think there's a question. Can we selectively exclude a specific image version or a specific pod, etc.?
Yeah. So it really depends on which capabilities you want. But if you're talking about image scanning, so you can choose you have a disable rule where you can disable based on so you need to kind of select the scope, but then you have parameters for the disablement. So whether it's based on the CVE, on the ID of the vulnerability, on the security check, and so on, even based on severity. So you can filter, low security. So that's definitely an option. You can also exempt, we call it exempt, but that's like a specific resource or registry type. We still don't have it on the image level, but we are looking to add So now we can exclude only entire registries and not specific images, but that's something we are looking to add in the short term. And regarding the questions about pod, what we have today is exclusion on the namespace level, I think. But we're adding additional parameters where you can also exclude based on pod label or pod name.
Okay, awesome. There's another couple questions here. Integration with log analytics workspace, and then there was questions kind of around, does this work with other monitoring tools like Splunk, or do you have to use log analytics?
Okay, so the log analytics, that's a good question, and I did mention a log analytics is required for the integration to the Defender profile. So that is only for a data pipeline. Like it's a pipeline that we use, but we don't store data into the log analytics at all. So if you don't provide the log analytics, we would use a default log analytics, and that shouldn't concern you. And if you want to use if you want to use Splunk or any other SIEM in order to analyze information, so we have an option to export data into SIEM and into Event Hub. So those are the options that are available. And in order to do that, that's something we provide via environment settings. You choose the continuous export capabilities, and you choose what type of information you want to export into Event Hub or into the log analytics. So those are the two options available today. And we also have a specific integration with Sentinel, if that's something you want to leverage. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that was good. And there's one more question. Is there any way to customize like eBPF runtime protection policies?
No, so currently we don't give you the granularity to, that's really new, so we didn't expose that. I wonder what is the origin of the ask. So why would you want to configure the eBPF, since we don't, this information is only used by Defender. It's not then, provided to customers. So it is provided in the form of alerts and recommendation, but not the raw data. So I'm wondering, is that kind of a request for the raw data, or any other reason for wanting to configure the eBPF? Because since it's new, I'm really open to any kind of suggestions or feedback.
Awesome. Yeah, hopefully we can see that dropped here in the chat window, and we'll get back to that if there are. I know we only have 3 minutes. I just want to thank Maya so much. Thank you so much for coming. This is great. This is awesome stuff. And let's see, there's another question about eBPF, but for the sake of time and for the 3 minutes that I need at the end, I'm going to hold that question, but I'll pass it over to Maya. And if there's any additional questions, or if people have any additional feedback, especially around this like eBPF implementation, that would be good. So Maya, I'll pass this question over to you, and if you have a response, I'll make sure that I disseminate that back out to the group. But because we only have 3 minutes, I want to ask everyone, if possible, that's on the call before you drop off. I just dropped a form in the chat window. I know I've done this before. I wanted to try to get like an email list together, and because of how I implemented the form, it did not like persist people's names, and so I couldn't actually use the data. So if possible, since it's the last call of the year, it's like a 3 or 4 minute survey. This would be super helpful for Dave and myself, just to make sure that if you're interested in opting into communication, especially if we have like a cancellation or a new topic, this would be a great way for us to bring all of that together. And then also, we want feedback around potential topic ideas, or if there's anything that we can do to make the call more effective. So yeah, if you could just take the last couple of minutes to do that, that would be great. And then thanks, Michael, for commenting her on that that comment. So Maya, if you don't mind, you could even drop your answer in the chat window. That may be an effective way to answer.
Sure. Sure, and I just scrolled and saw a question about Windows containers. So that's something we already started implementing, and you should see it releasing during the first half of the next year, starting with image scanning all through runtime detection as well. So I just saw this question, but I'm also going to answer via the chat.
Yeah, awesome. There's the question, and well, hopefully people are filling out the survey, but the question was, would eBPF have node level dependencies? I asked this because pod identity manipulates IP tables today on the nodes. How would this change with eBPF? I don't know if that's a question you can answer off the top of your head if you'd want to take back, but that was the question that we got.
Yeah, I'll take it offline and I'll answer it here in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Sounds good. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much. We super appreciate all of the great participation this year. And like I said, if y'all don't mind filling out that chat or that form, that would be super great. I'll pin it here. And look forward to seeing y'all again in the new year. So even if you're not able to fill that out immediately, if you could do that, within the next couple of days, would be great. Alrighty, yeah, that's kind of all we've got. So thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks all.
Bye, everybody.